Hello everyone, I'm George from Ireland. So this video is about Kamala Harris and her impact on the presidential race because just a few days ago Joe Biden announced that she was going to be his running mate. Now speculation had been rife for months. She appeared to be the front runner for the vice presidential position on the ticket, and so it proved. So a number of other names were considered. Biden said that it would almost definitely be a person of colour, quite likely a woman, ideally both, and she ticks both boxes. So she is a very formidable person to be running for VP, standing for VP, as we would say in Ireland or the United Kingdom. So because she's clever, she's self-assured, she's old enough, not too old, she's a seasoned politician, a consummate debater. She's experienced, she's a distinguished public servant. Seem to be no skeletons in her cupboard. And that's that. She's got name recognition, obviously been a senator for quite a few years. Compare that to Tim Kaine. What a non-entity he was, a sort of a grey man. Maybe the idea not to outshine Hillary Clinton. Why was he picked? He was from Virginia and he was a senator. I don't even remember. And I didn't lead to any bounce in the polls. I didn't even notice that Kaine had been selected, despite me being a close observer of the US political scene. So he was bland. I didn't think he brought anything to it. Okay, you've got a woman. We can't have two women on the ticket. Is that the idea? That would be too left field. Got to have a man, a white. That's not exactly original. I mean, I'm not an American, but you think of all the people who've been president and vice president, and 99% of the time, they've come from my demographic, white males. So, I mean, it wouldn't upset me greatly if I were an American to have someone who was neither of those things as president or vice president. I think white males have had more than their fair share of the top jobs. It wouldn't hurt to give other groups a go just occasionally. So Senator Harris, obviously she's an American who's Jamaican on her father's side, Indian on her mother's side. So her father's black Jamaican. Almost all Jamaican people are black. So the daughter of two academics who was born in Oakland, California. And predictably, Trump has been amplifying these birther conspiracy theories. Trump saying, well, I didn't say this, but I heard, just putting it out there, which was just nauseating. Didn't even have the courage of his convictions. At least with Obama about 10 years ago, Trump was saying he believed it. I mean, he can't be stupid enough to believe it. It's a proven fact that Miss Harris was born in the United States and is an American citizen. There's no doubt about that. Got an American passport. How on earth does she have the right to vote and be elected to the Senate if she's not an American? I mean, the undertone here is really unmissable, that non-white people somehow aren't real Americans, don't have the right to be elected to anything. It's despicable. So why does he mention it if he's not endorsing it? That is a tacit endorsement, but perhaps he's not actually fully embracing it because he thinks it would just be too dishonest even for him, might even hurt him, because after years of peddling this flagrant falsehood, Trump finally said yes, he recognized that Obama was an American, and he didn't actually apologize for having disseminated that lie for several years. It's just the lowest of the low, scraping the gutter of racism as usual. So I would wish he would disabuse people of this idea. And then, if Kamala Harris, I'm trying to pronounce it correctly, forgive me, I'm often accentuating it wrongly like most people. The emphasis goes in the first syllable, not the middle syllable. And I didn't know that till last week. So people born in the United States are almost always entitled to citizenship. One of the few exemptions would be if they're born to parents who are foreign diplomats. Now, there was this argument about what sort of visa her parents had when she was born. I don't believe that makes any difference. Even if it did, she's an American citizen now. What are you going to do? Take it away from her after 55 years? That would be grossly unjust. And why are people being so legalistic about this? They do it as the Dreamers as well. Someone could have been brought across the border from Mexico as a babe in arms, be well into their 20s, never have left the United States, be American in every single way, except a piece of paper. Wow. That's just too pedantic and so merciless, so inhumane. So anyway, and the vice president, Mike Pence, he has said not one phoneme against Trump, broadcasting this notion that Kamala Harris doesn't have the right to hold public office. And it's about Trump getting out this idea that there's fraud on the other side. I mean, who's the real fraudster? Who came up with the so-called Trump University, which wasn't a university at all? It's Trump. He's the con man. It's sickening. Remember Marco Rubio saying last time around, before Trump got the nomination, the Republican Party went full to a con man? Well, it did. And there are not enough Republicans who are brave enough to speak out against that. There's Steve Schwartz. There are a few others. There's Joe Scarborough, a former Republican congressman. There are now these Republicans against Trump who, to their eternal credit, are putting out ads saying, vote Joe Biden. And Biden's not a perfect candidate, even from my perspective. Okay, there's no such thing, but he's got his debilities and his shortcomings. But I'd take him over Trump any day. Anyway, so Kamala Harris has spent her life trying to help, do positive things, be constructive. Trump's not been trying to help anyone apart from a few of his billionaire friends. I mean, even if you're an ultra-Zionist, shifting the U.S. embassy in Israel to Jerusalem, that's to really play to the Zionist gallery. It doesn't really help the United States. I mean, what does Israel do for the United States? Almost nothing. So Kamala Harris obviously interested in helping her own groups a little bit, ethnic minority people, women, people who traditionally have had a fairly bad time in the United States. So she appears to be very healthy. I don't know if she's released any medical records. I've not heard anyone try and spread any rumors about her being infirm, because people want her to be able to step up to the plate. As the saying goes, she's a heartbeat from the presidency. Biden is fairly sprightly, energetic, upright for his age, but he is 77. And people say, oh, well, he's senile or something. I mean, I don't see much evidence of that. Occasional gaffes, don't think he mangles his words. But if you contrast him against Trump, there's no contest that Biden is far more with it, mentally agile, not firing off screeds at 3 o'clock in the morning, not emotionally incontinent, not so labile as Trump is, not throwing Twitter tantrums. He's not a complete ignoramus like Trump is. Trump, who's very often slurring his speech, mispronouncing things. Trump is scarcely literate, and on and on and on. So everybody knows that Kamala Harris, she scored a zinger against Biden several months ago when they're trying to work out who should get the presidential nomination over busing. Now, in case you don't know, in the 70s, schools in the United States have been desegregated in the 60s. Okay, some of them in the North never were segregated. But you can have a city which has got a school which is 90% black and a school which is 95% white, something like that. And they said, yes, theoretically they are desegregated, but in practice they're fairly segregated. Let's try and mix them so the schools are as close to 50-50 as possible, or some kind of racial balance. So therefore, you wouldn't necessarily get to the schools closer to your house, or to get on a bus and go quite a long way, maybe up to 2 hours to school. And that was a contentious policy. Some parents didn't like it and say, well, then we'd be ending up the ethnic minority in the other school, get bullied. And it's just a waste of time. We're just sleepy. But anyway, so he had said stop busing, and Kamala Harris said that was terrible, and she was someone who benefited from this. But they're both mature enough to put that behind them, and they can move forward together, and they can forgive each other. And Biden recognizes that he was insensitive on this issue, and he was overly courteous to some white supremacist senatorial colleagues. So collegiality is not always a virtue. Now, on to Kamala Harris's persona. I don't warm to her. She comes across a bit hectoring, a little bit conceited. That usually goes with politics. Trump's stratospherically stuck up, and that's not warranted by any talent or accomplishments on his behalf. But Miss Harris, she's at least serious-minded, respectable person, respectful of others, combative when she needs to be. She's judicious. I remember Trump whinging that she was very nasty to is it Kavanaugh, Judge Kavanaugh, wanted to get to the Supreme Court. No, she wasn't acerbic or anything. She asked some pointed and very worthwhile questions. He is seeking the highest honor in the judiciary, a lifelong place on the Supreme Court. Remember, Supreme Court justices cannot be removed unless they commit a crime. They could stay there till the day they die. There's no retirement age. So you'd want to scrutinize this person very carefully indeed and say he's not suitable. I would have said he's not suitable. Okay, it's not proven he committed rape, but you think, don't like the smell in here. You think this is someone who should be unblemished in reputation, and he surely brought himself into disrepute by his pathetic and puerile antics and the senatorial hearing, the whining self-pity, just a man after Trump's own heart. But anyway, she performed her duty admirably in grilling him. He needed to be scrutinized. And if you can't face that, well, then you shouldn't be going for the Supreme Court. So she didn't say anything rude, anything untoward. She conducted herself with a dignity that would profit Trump to study. But despite me not liking her especially, I do respect her and think she would be a more than competent vice president. Remember, she was Attorney General of California, the most populous state in the union. So she has achieved lots of laurels, a highly educated person, and on and on. I mean, I called her Miss Harris. She married someone who, a few years ago, at the age of 49, she's got no children. No doubt that will be thrown at her. Oh, what's wrong with you? You're unnatural. It's some sort of outrageous moral personal failing if a female doesn't spawn. Well, I don't think so. I think it's actually very responsible not to bring more people into this world, which is so overpopulated as it is. So she outclasses Mike Pence. But when it comes to a vice presidential debate, Pence might get down and dirty, not be logical, throw insults at her in his understated manner, and to some of his ignoramus supporters, that'll seem like a drone strike. They'll be cheering him on, thinking he's got her, even if it's replete with logical fallacies, because his style is very different from Trump. Remember, he comes across as placid, as reserved, someone who never seems to raise his voice, and certainly doesn't swear. So you might notice that Mike Pence, he doesn't answer questions. He so often dodges them because he's got no decent answer. He'd be flummoxed. When is put to him, all these outrageous things, these vulgarities uttered by Trump, and he would change the subject and say, well, I think what he meant was this. Or when Trump was lying about there being millions of fraudulent votes cast for Hillary Clinton, and Mike Pence saying, well, I think the president was expressing doubts all of us have about the electoral system. Well, he wasn't. He was lying. He was saying that there were millions of fraudulent votes when there is no evidence of that at all. If there are fraudulent votes, it is an infinitesimally small number. It's a drop in the ocean of is it 140 million votes were cast in the last presidential election? So, but Pence won't man up and won't actually tackle the issue because his running mate is a pathological liar. And Pence, he added supposedly some ballast to the Trump ticket last time. He won the hearts of some Christian fundamentalists. Why did these Bible bashers go for him? Because he's one of their own, supposedly a standard bearer for morality. Well, these evangelical Christians, they're often so judgmental, like he is, so censorious. He's often been anti-gay, or things like didn't want a needle exchange program, which was going to reduce the spread of HIV. And it's not just that this disease doesn't just affect drug addicts, it doesn't affect just prostitutes or whoever, it can affect other people who don't do these things. Would we like to reduce a deadly disease or not? Surely we would, for a tiny cost. Anyway, he's so often a moral authoritarian, he's puritanical, he'll never meet anyone, dine with a woman, unless his wife is present, not dine alone with one. Okay, not a bad rule to have, do that if you want, but he's holier than thou. He's most certainly one to moralize, except in relation to Trump. These Bible bashers, they make Trump uniquely immune from their extremely exacting moral standards. It's staggering, the hypocrisy. I'm not a particularly moralistic person. Trump committed adultery many times. Doesn't bother me one whit. But you think it very much bothered these people who are into the Ten Commandments. Trump, with his manifest untruths, which he utters on a daily basis, with his adultery, which he boasted about on newspaper headlines in the 1980, phoning up the New York Post to get them to put it on the front page. Marla Maple says this is the best sex she ever had with Donald Trump, whilst he's still married to Ivana. His vulgarities, his mammon worship, his peculation, his being so surient for adulation, all of it should put off a Christian. But anyway, so Trump's now saying that he can only lose if it's rigged. Well, who's really trying to rig it? It's him, by defunding the Postal Service and then being brazen enough to say, I want to reduce funding the Postal Service so that the postal ballots won't get there on time, because he calculates that more Democrats and Republicans vote that way, and he's probably right. But this is projection, false accusing his opponents of what he is trying to do. The trouble is that the Democrats lose, democracy loses. And Kamala Harris has come on the ticket. Haven't seen the bounce in the polls you might think. It's tightened a little bit, but I mean, I can't think of a time when a sitting president has been this far behind, this close to election day, 74 days to go by my computation, and managed to pull it off. But there's always a first time. Trump has broken so many precedents before. If he wins again, there's going to be such dysphoria. And the Democrats tend to be too intrapunitive. And that's maybe one of the things that sunk them last time. People who felt the burn and wouldn't vote for Hillary Clinton, voted for the Greens, Dr. Steen. But one of the heartening things about this time is the third party just don't have a presence. Until the other day, I hadn't read one word about the third party candidates. I wasn't trying to avoid it, but it just didn't come up in the news. The Greens, the Libertarian Party, the Reform Party really didn't feature. And obviously, they had a very good night 4 years ago, got 6% of the vote between them. They're going to get 2% this time if they're lucky. So this is to the benefit of the Democrats and more than it is the other side. So remember in 2000, the Greens had quite a strong showing, and that obviously helped George W. Bush just pip over the post at the Electoral College, obviously lost the popular vote. And many people were repentant native voters in 2004, voted Democrat, trying to avoid that mistake of last time. We may see that some of that obviously didn't actually work, not enough to defeat George W. Bush being re-elected, but we may see some of that same phenomenon in 2020. People who voted Green, or indeed for the other minor parties, who regret it because it put Trump in the White House, they vote Democrat this time. Of course, quite a lot of the Libertarians and Reform Party voters would otherwise vote Republican. And yes, some people who voted for a minor party last time will abstain rather than vote for any of the major candidates. So, as I say, a lot of them will be contrite. And likewise, some of those who didn't vote at all, who abstained, shall be repentant and see the error of their ways and mend their ways. So there's no third party challenge worth mentioning. So Trump's playbook, he will resort to xenophobia, as he's already done against Kamala Harris. And right on cue, a caravan will be spotted in Mexico heading for the border. Remember how twice before in this presidency that's happened. Remember where you heard it first. I've been saying this for about a year and a half. And strangely, that caravan will disappear just as soon as it's no longer electorally necessary. Oh, we've got to have Trump to stop this. You notice all these things are going wrong under Trump. And he says, oh, you've got to keep me here to stop it. Well, it's going wrong under you. You're not stopping it. Whether it's illegal immigration or crime, and there's too much crime in these Democrat-controlled cities, or Antifa or BLM at the end of the world, well, they're happening under you, and you can't ban them. I mean, BLM is a lawful organization. They express their views. They're actually trying to prevent crime, the murder of black people, not commit crime. And yes, of all the several million people who be on BLM marches, a handful have committed vandalism or thrown stones at the police, and that's obviously despicable. They should be punished severely. But to suggest that all or even most BLM people are even indirectly involved in criminality is a grotesque lie. So it's calumniating them to take the spotlight off the main issue, which is police brutality. And I'm not suggesting most police officers are brutal, but a significant minority are, and there are others who cover up for them. Anyway, so flagrant lying, that's a key Trump tactic. Doubling down when he's exposed in a lie, never apologizing, always moving on to the next lie. It's not energizing people as it used to. He can't hold his rallies, and he was able to electrify them last time, and he doesn't seem to be galvanizing his base as much. Nevertheless, something like 9 out of 10 people who voted for him last time are still voting for him. But it seems like he needed really every last vote to get that. He won 3 states by a whisker. It was 80,000 votes in three of those blue wall states that he won. So hyper-nationalism, ethno-nationalism, appealing to white anxiety, and frankly, white supremacy as well, and white nationalism, they all blur into each other. Hate speech, regressive capitalism, so taking money from the poor, giving it to the rich in tax cuts and so on. And that appeals to some people. So his war chest will be full of money from his billionaire friends whose greed knows no end. There'll be this faux fetish Christianity posing with the Bible instead of actually living the gospel. So the positive message of Christianity, that'll never get there. Be compassionate, remember the sojourner. We now call that person a refugee or an illegal immigrant. Do as you would be done by, well, that's the Zoroastrians originally, and things like that. Giving 2 shirts to the man who has none. Not living by the sword lest you die by the sword, and on and on. Remember, lying lips are an abomination to the Lord. That's from the Old Testament. So I think the other thing he might try is what his chum Vladimir Putin did. Well, his soulmate in Russia has announced that this vaccine's been invented. Sputnik, they called it, after the Soviet satellite, the first one in space, where the Soviets beat the world in the 1950s. They think, oh, we're beating the world again. Now, even 50% of Russian doctors say they do not trust it. I read that in the Moscow Times. Doesn't mean the other 50% do trust it. Some of them won't say anything, presumably partly out of fear that they get the sack if they do. So they're trying to telescope years of trials into just, I think it was 4 months. Now, a lot of countries said, well, we're going to have to just railroad this through really fast because we don't have time. And yeah, there is a bit of a risk if you don't test it properly, but the risk of not doing it is just so great because it's already killed, is it 1 million people around the world almost? So it seems to be sham science. The 3 phases they've gone through at breakneck speed, and it seems to be terrible folly. The World Health Organization not signing off on this, and Trump may well try this October surprise. We've got a vaccine. You've heard his absolute drivel before about hydroxychloroquine when it's not proven to cure this at all, giving people false hope, a false sense of security, putting bleach into your lungs. Like the worst thing you could do. I am staggered. How does he get away with such idiocy? And the thing that really blows my mind is 40% of Americans not only support him, many of them think he is splendid. He lies to them blatantly every single day, and many of them trust him. Wow, I just didn't know that irrationality and stupidity could reach this level. But the trouble is about Russia putting this really untested thing on the market is it'll people lower people's guard. Okay, we don't need to have social distancing, no masks because we've got this now, and it probably won't work very much. It might work a little bit, but not as effective as it should be. And side effects, we don't really know how bad they are, so it might be very severe. And then it'll be grist to the mill of the anti-vaxxers. You see, vaccines don't work. Vaccines are worse than the actual disease. And I think the other thing Trump might have up his sleeve is playing his last card, bombing Iran, rally to the flag, despite the fact that the Iranians observed the Iran deal with scrupulosity, and the United States ripped it up. Well, Donald Trump did. So, and Tucker Carlson, who seems to be Trump's guru, has pleaded with him not to do this. And pundits always say, if you bomb another country, it leads to an uptick in your poll rating as American president. But Trump will stop at nothing to perpetuate his regime. As a case of ADT, any damn thing. Everything else seems to be failing. This is some last desperate gamble. This roll of the dice, this gambit might even pay off. It can't get worse. It doesn't really matter if he loses by 1% or 10%. He's still losing. So you've got to go big or go home. So starting a war in a last-ditch attempt to grub for the Islamophobic vote would redound to his eternal infamy. I know he's infamous as it is. He is just foul. But it would teach a dangerous lesson to the world. The United States is unappeasable, so don't make a peace deal with them, because they'll just break it anyway and just attack you anyway. You got to stand firm. You got to be armed to the teeth. You got to get nukes. They wouldn't dare do this if you did have nuclear weapons. Look at North Korea. But let the reign of error be over. Kamala Harris could be an excellent president, she's vice president first of all. Biden, will he make it to the end of the first term? I mean, my fear is, what if Biden collapses now, not necessarily dies, and then that will really put the wobbles out. Kamala Harris could set up the presidential position, but that's still, she might be too much of a radical choice, and it would really take the wind out of the Democrats' sails, and there's an impetus behind them. Obviously, Trump might stumble, might collapse in public, and hopefully his support would collapse. Trump's brother just died, which might remind us of his fragility and his mortality. On the other hand, some sympathy might accrue to him. A few more people vote for him. And remember, he's not released his medical records. He released that flagrant lie by his doctor, which he got him to sign, saying, "Be the healthiest man ever to stand for the presidency." Ha, ha, ha. Trump aged, what was he, 72? What healthier than John F. Kennedy, who was 43? Healthier than Obama in his 40s, who played basketball every day. Healthier than George W. Bush, who was in the top 1% for men his age at 54, who went jogging and cycling every day, who had very low fat mass on him. I mean, it's just yet another absolutely flagrant lie. These lies which spill from his sinful, slavering maw, a transparent tissue of lies. But so many people believe that. Anyway, come on, Kamala Harris. I'd like to see her as vice president. So thank you so much for supporting my channel. Those of you who do, I really need donations to keep it going. You can donate on PayPal, georgecallahan79@gmail.com. Remember, Callahan spelled Callaaghan. It's all small letters. Thank you. Good night.